Nintendo is the king of handheld consoles. It's no exaggeration to say that with the NES in the 1980s, Nintendo revitalized the entire console gaming business.
Nintendo, because of the way it has innovated console hardware, has had an influence on game design.
They have like decades of experience developing games for handhelds, but they also have decades of experience of developing games for traditional TV consoles.
Nintendo's enduring success in video games has been built on the powerful combination of timeless, character-led franchises and innovative hardware. I'm Arjun Karpal, and in this episode of Built for Billions, I'm exploring Nintendo's console evolution. From the NES to the Wii U and the Switch, the Japanese game makers' bold experiments have produced both hits and misses alike. But that very willingness to experiment is what has so often left rivals racing to catch up. Nintendo entered the home console market with the Famicom in Japan in 1983, which became the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, internationally in 1985. Its launch came just after the video game crash of 1983, when poor quality consoles and games flooded the market and nearly wiped out the industry. By pairing strict quality control with iconic titles, the NES restored trust in video games and created the blueprint for Nintendo's future. And it wasn't long before Nintendo followed up with another game changer, the handheld Game Boy.
The Game Boy and the Famicom and what they did, it brought Nintendo to the living room. Game Boy and Tetris were very iconic moments in the early 90s.
I think that the Game Boy was the first commercially successful console. So it was portable, affordable, the battery life was pretty good because the screen was just monochrome. Nintendo back then was very clever in bundling it with Tetris, which is until today one of the most iconic video games that we have.
But Nintendo's hardware success wasn't always guaranteed. In the mid-90s, the company suffered a major setback with the Virtual Boy, a premature attempt at 3D gaming that was discontinued after less than a year. By the early 2000s, they faced even more pressure with their GameCube. It was a powerful, capable machine, but it was ultimately overshadowed by Sony's PlayStation 2. The GameCube sold just 21.7 million units, while the PS2 moved a staggering 160 million, becoming the best-selling console of all time. And yet, while Nintendo struggled in the living room, its handheld dominance remained untouchable. The Game Boy Advance and the dual-screen DS revolutionized portable play, with the DS eventually selling more than 154 million units.
At the time, PlayStation was trying to get into portable gaming. They launched the PlayStation Portable. And Nintendo, rather than just create a more powerful Game Boy, they went and created a dual screen device and a touch screen. This is before the iPhone popularized all that.
So when Dragon Quest came out in the late 80s, early 90s, and this was the first iteration of a Japanese RPG, and it had all the elements that we know today, sort of these manga-esque characters in a sort of a fantasy world with turn-based combat, a single-player sort of storyline that can be followed. All of a sudden, we get the ability of playing a game across two screens. So for a role-playing game, that means you can have map access all the way through your game on a second screen. So it can actually sort of declutter the main world and allow for more transparency. And so I think, that's what draws people in, is sort of Nintendo's ability to push these innovations. For instance, with the Wii, all of a sudden, people are playing tennis in their front rooms.
On paper, the Wii was an underdog. While Sony and Microsoft chased raw power and cutting-edge graphics, Nintendo moved in a different direction, unlocking a new market. The Wii wasn't a powerhouse, but its simplicity, motion controllers, and irresistible pack-in game Wii Sports made it a cultural phenomenon.
There was Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, and they were all doing very similar things. And they were trying to compete with one another. And Nintendo realized they couldn't play this game. And with their next machine, the Nintendo Wii, it wasn't actually much more powerful than the GameCube. In fact, it wasn't even a HD console. Everyone moved into HD at that point. Nintendo did not. They made a motion control device. And waving a controller around was a lot less complicated than using an analog stick and a controller. It made games more accessible, broadened it out to the family.
But the Wii's massive success was followed by one of Nintendo's most baffling chapters, the Wii U. It was a console caught between two worlds, part tablet, part home system, with a marketing campaign that left consumers more confused than excited.
Here's why we need Wii U.
It ultimately became one of Nintendo's biggest misses, selling just 13.5 million units, a tiny fraction of its predecessors' more than 100 million units.
The Wii U was a flop, and Nintendo has acknowledged as such. People felt it was an update of the Wii, but didn't quite realize that the new controller, which had the touchscreen, was allowing different play options which weren't possible on the Wii or any other consoles for that matter.
I think that in the case of the Wii U, Nintendo learned not to be arrogant, not to be too complacent, and they learned also there was still something in that idea of the Wii U to disconnect the TV from portable gaming and kind of have like an almost hybrid device in the case of the Wii U.
Meanwhile, mobile gaming exploded. Smartphones and tablets were suddenly everywhere, and with them came a new wave of low-cost games that kept users coming back. Titles like Angry Birds, Clash of Clans, and Candy Crush created an entirely new audience of casual gamers. For the first time, Nintendo wasn't just competing with other console makers, they were competing with the phone in everyone's pocket. In 2012, mobile gaming was just a small slice of the pie, accounting for 18% of the $70 billion global games market, while consoles represented nearly half of revenues. But just 4 years later, everything flipped. By 2016, mobile had shot past both PCs and consoles to claim 40% of the rapidly growing industry. Almost overnight, smartphone games were dominating the headlines, investor calls, and everything. And people were questioning whether the company's handheld consoles like the 3DS and its brand of casual games aimed at young gamers even had a future.
Even Nintendo started thinking about its own business model back in the time. So they, I think, during that time wanted to appease investors to some extent by going into mobile, by kind of like breaking their own rules.
And then, in the summer of 2016, came Pokemon Go. While the augmented reality hit wasn't actually developed by Nintendo, it features some of their most iconic creatures and became an overnight global sensation. I remember the absolute madness, crowds of literally hundreds running through parks to catch rare Pokemon. Suddenly, Nintendo's worlds felt alive in the real one, and it completely reshaped the perception of what the company could be in the modern era.
At that time, Nintendo released Super Mario Run, which was a mobile game. So they were prepared at that point to take their character IP out from the console space into other areas, into almost competitive platforms.
The timing couldn't have been better. While Nintendo's mobile games didn't deliver huge revenue, they achieved something more important. They brought back old fans, created new ones, and reminded the world why Nintendo's characters mattered, just months ahead of one of Nintendo's biggest hardware gambles. In 2017, Nintendo launched the Switch, a hybrid console that could be played at home or on the go. It was the culmination of decades of experience, merging Nintendo's legendary handheld DNA with home console power.
I think that when the Switch came out in 2017, you could see that Nintendo radically transformed internally.
They've harnessed some of the things that they did well with the Wii U but didn't sell particularly well to put that innovation into the Switch and actually do a good job at marketing that and bringing that to a broader audience.
Nintendo had redeemed itself. The original Switch went on to become Nintendo's best-selling console ever, with over 155 million units sold, fundamentally reshaping an industry that many thought had outgrown dedicated handhelds. Now, Nintendo is building on that momentum with the Switch 2, a console designed to carry the hybrid philosophy forward while giving developers more power and fans more flexibility.
The Switch 2 mainly seems to be an upgrade, a hardware upgrade of the Switch, and many people felt like, okay, it was kind of necessary. The Switch was getting to 8 years old.
It's quite hard to follow a successful machine with another successful machine.
More than 40 years after the NES pulled the industry back from the brink, Nintendo still faces the same fundamental challenge. How do you keep reinventing the hardware without losing the simplicity and charm that made you a household name in the first place?
Their creativity is at the heart of everything they do. They're always often trying to do something innovative or new with everything they create.
I don't think they can just put out a Switch 3, which is going to be another hardware improvement. People don't want that. They don't so much expect Xbox or Microsoft or Sony to radically innovate something, but we still expect it from Nintendo. My
concern for Nintendo is maintaining momentum. It's how can you keep that audience coming in? How can you keep them engaged?
In the final episode, we'll look at Nintendo's boldest gamble yet. From movies to merch, find out how the company's leveraging decades of nostalgia to build a universe that exists way beyond the console.